Good evening, everybody. A very warm welcome to this panel discussion by the Water Law Initiative at Sai University. It's been after some time that the Water Law Initiative has come forward with another set of panel discussion. Today's topic is on water governance and urban transformation in Chennai, building resilience amidst climate challenges. And as we all know, Chennai has been, it's been at a very, it's a rapidly growing city. There's a lot of urbanization. There's climate risk, deepening water stress. But the biggest thing I see in Chennai is the uh, whole polarized issues relating to water. On one side, we've seen catastrophic floods in 2015 to on the extreme other end, we have seen in 2019 acute droughts almost to the moment of day zero. And when you look at some of these things, you realize that this water crisis is not just environmental or infrastructural, but there are a lot of fundamental questions relating to governance, equity, long-term planning. So today's discussion, we have brought together three distinguished voices whose work deeply engages with these intersections. So we are honored to have with us Dr. Bharat Punjabi, who is a scholar of water law and water governance and urban policy. He teaches at the Asian Institute, Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. His research focuses on governance in large metropolitan cities and development policy, and he currently works on a major Canadian project on affordable housing. Then we have Krupa ji, who's a journalist, novelist, and a nonfiction writer whose work compellingly blends lived experiences, environmental reporting, and social critique. I think many of you, those who are studying at Sai University, would know her book Rivers Remember, which Dr. Punjabi recommended as a part of his Asian Cities course. So it's a landmark account of 2015 Chennai floods where she weaved together personal and political narratives to explore city's complex water landscape. We are glad to have her with us. Then we have Professor Rhett Larson, who's an expert in domestic and international water law. He's the Richard Morrison Professor of Water Law at Arizona State University and a senior research fellow at the Kyle Center for Water Policy. He's been working a lot across different regions from Colorado Basin to the Middle East. Now he plans to work on a lot of different cities, connecting cities across the globe on issues of water crisis. So I hope with these perspectives from different sectors, from legal to urban, journalistic, and global standpoints, we can have a very, we can explore how, through this discussion, how Chennai can build a more resilient, inclusive, and adaptive water governance framework in the current and future climate scenarios. So over to you, Bharat, if you can take over the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Abhishek. And happy to be here again at Sai. I've always enjoyed being at Sai events and also enjoyed teaching the global classroom, which Krupa had helped me with and you had facilitated. So it's always exciting to be back, even if it's virtually in Chennai. And and a very distinguished panel indeed with Professor Rhett Larson, who works on southwestern U.S. water politics, and Krupa, obviously a very authoritative voice on Chennai. So yeah, thank you for having me. I will try to generally speak on the same boring theme of urban governance, which I have tried to dwell on for the last 7 to 8 years, both in my teaching and research, because I think it's fundamentally important to understand as to why we are not able to make a breakthrough in our sustainability goals, in our economic growth goals, because our cities they may be on the political radar from time to time, but there's not that kind of sustained attention on our urban problems as one would like one would like to see in India. I have some PowerPoints which I'll try to bring up now and share with everyone. I, uh, these are issues of great relevance in the Indian context, given that our cities, both constitutionally and in terms of the politics, have not received the attention they have, in for many decades. Until more recently, 2 decades back, we've had more sustained attention on urban problems in Indian cities, both by the Congress and the Hindu nationalist BJP. But we've not gone far enough in governance reform. And when I often see commentary and research on resilience, it does appear that the problem still stands out, and which is what I'm going to speak on today, in the context of Chennai, but also in a kind of more wider, broader context on what is being done on with respect to climate change planning in Indian cities, and how far we can actually go in terms of achieving our goals, given the kind of constraints we have with respect to governance. So I've decided to title it as Urban Resilience in a Fragmented Governance System, and by that I mean that Indian cities, like many other cities in other parts of the world, are bedeviled by the presence of too many agencies, levels of government with overlapping functions, and that can really impede progress. And Chennai and other large Indian metropolitan cities, stand out as examples of that, fragmented urban governance systems. The first thing I'd like to begin by is, just lay out the ground here for what we are trying to do with our cities with the climate change challenge. And here, the work of the World Resources Institute, in collaboration with the Indian government and state governments and several city governments, is really noteworthy. So the one way to look at this is how are they drafting these plans? What is in these plans, and what are the objectives? So that will be generally answered through my focus on some of the WRI's work. And what is the data and what are the analysis shaping these plans? And you'll see there's a lot of ambition here. With all the technical capacities we have in our universities, and the WRI has helped bring all of that together. And again, I think the promise is there, but we may not be able to achieve much, given that we don't have a coherent governance system to address some of these problems, will be my argument. And how resilient are Indian cities? We know that India faces multiple challenges, and water is just one of them. So it's very important to look at water uh, from the perspective of what are the other associated challenges in the Indian urban context, and the problem of heat during summers, uh, the problem of pollution, all of those, which require collective action solutions, um, can are very, they have a lot of common ground with the challenge of water. So I'll just try to highlight that as well. Um, and what local capacity can we build to, given that, our municipalities do not have many powers, what local capacities can we build, given that constraint, to have effective collective action on water? And most and importantly of all, I want to highlight the challenge of fragmentation in urban and metropolitan governance. Again, I want to highlight that that's not a challenge unique to India. The presence of many agencies and departments trying to govern cities, it's a challenge we face in Canada, but the degree of the challenge in India is far more complex. And it is a challenge which political scientists and governance experts in the Center for Policy Research in Delhi and other think tanks have often tried to address. And I think fundamentally, it's going to be of prime importance in the coming years as we see various and climate change challenges in India. The question of water stress in Indian cities was highlighted almost more, I mean, in 2018 by the Niti Aayog. falling groundwater levels, challenges with rural to urban water transfers. Uh, but the problems become a lot more grim in the past few years. Chennai is an example of that. The floods and then the drought and a lot of variation in weather has meant that that the challenge is quite grim. And amongst most city governments, and state governments, the Tamil Nadu state government has been the most dynamic in its response. If you look at some of the way in which the state government has tried to do, come up with collaborations with international agencies to draft climate change plans. So the response is very dynamic. But this map here shows us the level of water stress in India. And you can see that except for some of our coastal areas and some areas in northern and central India, most of our districts face tremendous levels of water stress. Okay, the red color shows declining groundwater levels, and this is a challenge that was taken up by a very important national water reforms committee set up by the present government, but on which nothing has been done so far. So it highlights to you how political the challenge is of addressing water issues. So that's the broader background. And as I said, and this has been a kind of focus of my teaching in the past few years, as the World Resources Institute India has taken up the challenge of drafting climate change plans. Uh, you have an acknowledgement and realization that this is going to be a very important issue. Okay, and a very bottom-up process was set up, in this local governments to collect climate data on Indian cities on various subjects, and in states where capacity wasn't present in cities, the state government actually took up, the responsibility of drafting climate change plans. And across the spectrum, you have, data on heat and flooding and waste management, and, with looking at also carbon footprint of Indian cities, which is, very negligible compared to other cities in the world. Uh, a lot of data was brought together and action plans were developed by municipal governments. But again, we'll see that, this remains a very onerous task given how under-resourced Indian municipal governments are, and their status in the Indian political system constitutionally. One of the I think remarkable things I've seen about the way the climate change challenge has been addressed is the projection of certain political personalities, okay, whether it's the prime minister or the deputy chief minister of Karnataka. Uh, and it does show that, the environmental problems in cities are on the radar. So that's very promising. Okay. And in Mumbai, for instance, Aditya Thackeray has been a big ambassador for, climate change, governance reform, environmental governance reform in the city, and acknowledging the nature of the challenge. So, and that, I think, has been used very well by some of the UN agencies to, create incentives for leaders to, take this problem seriously. And I think we've gone a great distance because of that, that synergy between some of the international actors like the UN and WRI, and how they've wooed, politicians, local city politicians to be, very active in meeting the climate change problem. And I think that's something that shows in the Chennai context as well, with the DMK government trying to do whatever it can. However, as you know, there's always a conflict there between, meeting your sustainability goals and, your ambitions around economic growth, which is not an easy challenge to address. It's a big trade-off and will require a lot of skill in the political class. I've created this Venn diagram to, answer the question, are Indian cities resilient? And there are many ways to look at it, right? The flows of water, you can look at it from a metabolic lens, as some geographers do, and uh, and geographers and even people who are doing modeling work in civil engineering do. You can look at it from the governance perspective, as scholars like myself try to, try to focus on, where we look at the nature of institutional structures and organizations. So urban resilience is really a product of all of these factors. The social dynamics, which I think the WRI reports have excelled in, not only bringing up the technical analysis, but also, more, bring, but also merging them with a certain social demographic understanding of Indian cities and the aspirations of the population and the built environment, which I think tends to be a kind of neglected subject within the Indian context, but I think is far gaining prominence given the work of economists and your, ecosystem services, the restoration of rivers, lakes, water bodies, all of that is growing in importance. But my interest is largely in governance, and I know I'm always interested in whether we have the governance capacity to deal with some of these some of these questions around sustainability. So you cannot restore a river from the level of the state government. You need to have certain local buy-in and local capacity to, to continue meeting that challenge after the restoration work is done. And that's where Indian cities really, do not do very well, because they don't have, we don't have sufficient devolution in the Indian context. Chennai's policies and resilience stand out. I think the 2015 book, as Krupa's book amply pointed out, it was published in 2018-19, how this was a big wake-up call for the city. And we'll probably have an update from Krupa on where things are with respect to, but there's been a lot of change. There's been a lot of change. There's been a lot of initiatives on regional planning. There's been a lot of initiative both by the state government and the local government on how to, not just be more nimble in addressing the water challenge, but also confronting the problems of capacity and and the challenge of flooding, which I think was understood given that water bodies and reservoirs were not desilted properly. So all of those are long-term challenges. But what I find very interesting about Chennai is also how a city like Chennai, which is in a water scarcity region, has also uh, gotten its act together in increasing supply. So, the desalination plant, which faculty at Sai University are actually part of initiative studying and running some of these plants, have has really been, has really stood out, okay, as being very innovative. This is also, as one of the most dynamic regions in India, economically speaking, in terms of economic growth, the ambition with which both New Delhi, the central government, sees, Tamil Nadu, but also the state government of Tamil Nadu. So, all of these challenges actually, interestingly, are emerging in the context of all of that economic ambition. Okay, with manufacturing, it's a major auto manufacturing center. Apple is actually going to Tamil Nadu. So given all of that, I think there needs to be a sufficient acknowledgement of this conflict between economic growth and sustainability, and how we can address it. The question of sponge parks, which has come up recently. I've not really, been able to visit some of these, governance experiments, but given what is being said in the media, it seems that there's a lot of tension between how the state government is trying to restore water bodies and how there's often local resistance to that. And some of these things have to be, as I said, have to be really, brought in front and center for. Uh, am I being heard or something? Okay, all right.
You are,
Was
you are.
yeah. Uh, I saw something in the chat, so I thought there's something going on there with my audio. The restoration of water bodies and creeks. I mean, if you walk around Chennai now, you can see that infrastructure being laid out to, clean up the rivers. Again, my question is, will that be done? How sustainable is that politically, fiscally, given that, local governments play a marginal role in that? It's really state government agencies doing more of the work again, and they're more active, is my next point, than local municipal governments in doing the important work on resilience. And state governments will be a part of this, given the Indian political system. My question is, how far can we go with that kind of structure in place? And I realize that's a very big constitutional question, but it is very relevant when we start asking questions on resilience, local resilience. Uh, and last but not least, I want to highlight that in a more detailed way. The fragmentation of the governance system in Chennai, and this is something most of us are aware of, is a big problem in large, sprawling metropolitan cities around the world. Who is in charge of what? Okay, and I'm very happy to be part of a university here, the University of Toronto, which actually excels in urban research issues, urban governance issues, and this is a problem everywhere, not just Chennai. But as I said at the beginning, that the degree of fragmentation in Chennai and in large Indian metropolitan cities is more complex, much more broader than other parts of the world, where you have too many agencies involved in overlapping functions. And I'll highlight that by showing you all how many agencies there are in charge of water, duplication of functions, clashes of turf. And I've gained this from my many interviews with civil servants in the Chennai and Tamil Nadu context. In the 1980s, as a part, a number of parastatals were set up in Chennai and in other parts of India to deal with water and sewerage questions. And I think we need to really take a good look at all of that again and see how we can change things. Agencies have a lot of capacities, others don't. And we need to really have good decentralized bodies with clear lines of authority. And this stands out as a failure of Indian urban governance. The fact that we had constitutional amendments in the 1990s, but the state governments have failed to devolve power to cities. The legal framework around metropolitan and urban planning is quite complex even now. I realize that the current CMDA is very ambitious and is doing a lot, but the complexity is there. Okay, and my own case is that we need to really make cities in charge uh, of of their own destiny. Okay, there's only so much the metropolitan authority can do, which it comes under the state government. You need more coordination also between land use and water resources planning, and this was again amply brought up by Krupa in her work in 2018-19 after the floods. And if you look at the legal framework of planning itself, there are many agencies in Chennai. The laws, the acts around water, may often conflict with each other, um, and this is a real obstacle. The number of agencies involved in the Chennai metropolitan area. And I realize that this might have changed a bit in the recent years, where we see more consolidation happening. But I think it requires more detailed research on where things stand now with respect to land use and water resource planning. Um, so I hope everyone can see this. I mean, I can share the slides with you all after the talk is over. So there's need to be a lot more awareness that large sprawling metropolitan cities have these problems. Okay, and sustainability and building resilience requires better coordination. And only if they are able to better coordinate can we meet some of the challenges, governance challenges, with respect to resilience. So it also requires that we, acknowledge the tension between economic growth and sustainability. It's quite evident in the Tamil Nadu context with all its economic ambitions. We need to really take a kind of regional perspective on water governance. I think it's very important. So not just urban water governance, but look at urban hinterland relations and where water's coming from. And again, there's very rich scholarship in Chennai on that already. It just needs to be, absorbed in the kind of government. And we also need, I think, social science expertise, local scholars like Chennai, like Krupa, I think, who brought a very rich perspective to, understanding of Chennai problems, and not just rely on science. We need to really marry that, different kinds of expertise, which often in the Indian context tends to get lost, where there's a lot more premium paid on science. But science, as given the turmoil in the world today around scientific expertise and all kinds of expertise, has to be situated in a social political context, and which is what I think is very important for Indian cities. More decentralization, I think that was very obvious right from the beginning that I have this bias, my own bias towards more. I mean, decentralization by itself won't solve everything, but it will go a long way in addressing some of the problems we have in Indian cities when it comes to climate change, planning, and resilience. And we also think that we'll always have different levels of government, and we need better coordination. Here I want to recall an interview I had with a very senior civil servant. I won't name him, obviously, but who was lamenting how he had gotten a project in neighboring Andhra Pradesh cleared to meet Chennai's water needs, and someone was just sitting over the file, in a context which is parched. There's a lot of water scarcity at that time. I think I had done this interview in 2017. So we need better levels, better coordination between levels of government when it comes to addressing the water challenge. And I realized I went beyond water here, but I think I just wanted to kind of lay the ground out here on how important the governance challenge is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bharat. I think it's quite interesting your focus on the whole issue of fragmented governance and the need for coordination. And it's not just Chennai. I've seen it back home also. That whole issue of duplication, be it in Guwahati or Shillong, in Indian cities. That whole because of our whole federal structure. If I'm to bring in law here, and how do we separate water governance between center, state, and now the urban local bodies as well. So that's something which is a major challenge, and as you rightly said, that coordination is the only way forward. But it's also good to see, as you highlighted, that active steps have been taken by the government, like sponge parks and desalination plants, and even right now water issues of climate change are coming to the forefront of Indian politics. There are a lot of politicians talking about it, so that is also something something positive. So if we can move forward, Krupa, would you like to
Thank you.
share your views further?
Sure. Uh, Thank you. I thought about what I could speak about, and since this is a conversation about water governance and transformation in Chennai, and my own work is about the floods, I thought I could just read a small part from my book about this chapter titled "Where Does Our Water Come From," which sort of also lays the context for what exactly happened on the night of the flood. And after that, I could just sort of give you an update on what has happened after that in terms of, in my follow-up with the rivers of Chennai. Water, rather the lack of it. This is from a chapter called "Where Does Our Water Come From Rivers Remember." Water, rather the lack of it, has always been a concern for those of us living in Chennai. Loud calls of "Tanni Vandache" to announce the arrival of the metro water lorries resound across rich and poor neighborhoods, especially in summer. Until the floods in 2015, I hadn't paid much attention to where our water comes from. It was only when the water had finally decided to reach my own home without the help of lorries that I found out about the 4 large reservoirs: Pural, which dates back to 1876, Pundi, which dates back to 1944, Sholavaram, 1876-77, and Chembrambakam, which dates back to the Pallava era, in suburban Chennai, which take care of the city's water needs. This is also supplemented by groundwater and, as Bharat pointed out, desalination plants in Nemili and Minjur in neighboring districts. the Viranam tank that brings the Kaveri river's water, and the Telugu Ganga project that brings water from the Krishna river in the neighboring Andhra Pradesh. So these are basically the ways in which we all receive water in the city. And the city has actually been always known for a certain amount of water scarcity. Before 2015, that was the primary identity of Chennai. I'll go back to the excerpt. One river over all others, even though it does not flow through the city, has captured the heads, hearts and politics of Chennai. From festivals along her banks to be unsung in her praise, it is the Kaveri, unlike any of the city's rivers, that is on the lips of every farmer, citizen and neighbour of Tamil Nadu. Even as Chennai battles for the Kaveri, boycotts IPL cricket matches and engages in bitter banter over sharing water, it has ignored her sisters who call this very city home, the Adyar, Kuvum and Kosas-Talayar rivers. The 136 kilometer long Kosas-Talayar splits into two branches outside Chennai at the Keshavaram Dam. The main Kosas-Talayar feeds the Pundi reservoir and then flows through Tiruvallur district. From there it reaches the Bay of Bengal in the north of the city. Meanwhile, the other branch, Kuvam, heads south from the dam into Chennai's Kilpok, Nungambakam and Triplicane areas before heading to the Bay of Bengal. The Adyar begins at the Chembrambakam reservoir, from where it travels through Kanchipuram, Tiruvallur and southern Chennai before joining the sea near the Adyar area. Cutting through all three major rivers is the man-made freshwater navigation channel Buckingham Canal, built in 1806. Chennai has an elaborate system of natural and man-made drainage. This includes small lakes, drains and canals. The city's rivers, however, are seasonal and remain dry for a large part of the year. Many people do not even realize they are crossing rivers and canals while crossing the bridges in the city, for they look less like rivers and more like parched playgrounds, ripe for leisurely games of cricket and kite flying, or they look like sewage canals. The 150-year-old beautiful Napier Bridge, built over the Kuvam near the Marina Beach, has fewer admirers because of its stench. The same goes for the Periyar Bridge, previously called St. George's Bridge, built in 1805. It is this very complex network of interconnected water bodies and drainage systems that drowned us in 2015 when rains lashed the city. Between 8th November and 11th November 2015, several parts of Tamil Nadu received 125 to 280 mm of rainfall every day. By mid-November, a swollen Adyar river greeted people and a nervousness was apparent. Then I'll just go straight to the rain part of. After a lull in the rainfall in the last week of November, 490 mm of rain pounded parts of the city on 1st December. Officials opened the Chembrambakam and let 29,000 cusecs of water out into the Adyar River over a period of 12 hours. This once in 100 rain, a freak incident in one of the hottest years in Chennai, plunged the city into untold misery and wiped out the lives and livelihoods of many, even as rains continued to lash the city unabated after this. On that day, the Chembrambakam saw an inflow of 31,000 cusecs, 26,000 of it before 6 in the evening. As this large amount of water joined the networks of rivers and drains, which were already full of breaches and swollen lakes, there was pandemonium. The next day, trains, buses, share autos, cars and bikes were replaced by catamarans, coracles, fiber boats, lifeboats, large tubs, even kayaks, in which fishermen, actors, volunteers and good Samaritans of Chennai came out in large numbers to rescue, be rescued and in turn rescue more people. This is basically just the gist of what actually happened and what we all saw on those few days in Chennai, and I thought I'll begin there. In terms of where we have gone since, I'd like to, this is not this is sort of what shall I say, a casual anecdote that I'd like to tell you about. I happened to meet with some bureaucrats in the US to work with the local government. This was much before FEMA was completely dismantled and sort of whatever. It's not as it was in its form when my conversation happened. And I met with bureaucrats from people from different countries who are working with the government in Tamil Nadu, trying to figure out just what to do about our water problem and how to fix this. I hear now that the Japanese government and the Dutch government and before Trump, the American government was also involved in sort of trying to figure out how to bring a certain resilience, this particular climate resilience that we are talking about. And one of the things that I understood from all of these people is they're trying to figure out how to move the city up at this point, because what I'm given to understand is in places where flooding happens as much as it does in Chennai, and we've seen it now in a sustained manner ever since 2015, because we've started to pay attention to it now. It may have happened before, but I think we're starting to pay attention more. And so the solution, it looks like, is to pay people to move up, basically to move the city up. And so the first step towards figuring out how to make this city and water resilient in terms of mitigating floods would probably be, I think the solution to that is in mapping what places are going to be flooding. And so that is the major exercise now in terms of figuring out how we are going to, is it going to be crowdsourced, is it satellite, what kind of mapping are we going to do in terms of figuring out where does this city flood the most, and how do we go about offering them help, and is it going to be full-time, is it going to be permanent, is it going to be only as the disaster is happening? So there are solutions to all of that, and it looks like there are people right now working on those kind of solutions in terms of the temporary solutions, and then a slightly long-term solution, and then a sort of like a permanent solution. From what I understood from the disaster experts I spoke to recently, is that the temporary solution could be something as simple as like a little makeshift gate that encloses itself around neighborhoods, not letting water in during the flooding. It could be something, it'll be made of materials that are sort of cheaper and easier to do, so that those areas are sort of protected. The houses on the banks are protected from river water. And the main concern seems to be that the city of Chennai is very flat and does not have a very naturally good drainage system. So water doesn't just flow into the ocean as such, right, naturally. And so which is why now you've started to see this jugaad of water pumps being employed on every other street when it floods. So when major areas of the city flood, immediately corporation workers bring water pumps and they pump the water out. And at first, I thought this was going to be temporary, but it now looks like maybe they'll have to permanently put some pumps in many places, because the city itself is so flat. They call it a pancake. It doesn't actually move along water in many places, and there are many neighborhoods that are below sea level also in the city, and so water cannot move into find a way to sort of leave, and so they will need to pump water out. And so this seems to be another solution that they're working on. And the final solution that was being discussed was, this is done in some parts of the world, which is you pay people who live on the lowest levels of, or you give them some kind of tax breaks or some sort of incentives, and you try and make them either move higher in their own current existing dwelling, and so you're literally basically lifting the entire city's height up, and so you make infrastructure available at a level where that is sort of flood resilient. So the whole city is now basically, all homes begin only at like a certain height, and so this fear of your livelihood going, your your entire life and its savings going away sort of reduced drastically. Either you give tax breaks or you give some sort of an incentive, or you buy them out. Basically, the government takes over parts of the city that are extremely prone to flooding. So this was also, in terms of, because there is funding coming in to make the city flood resilient. And these are just ideas that were being thrown around as possible solutions by others. And so I don't know if, so I'm just passing on what experts are saying about Chennai. And so this is the kind of conversation that was happening. In terms of the preparedness or what the trajectory that the city has taken in, I was recently asked to write a column last year during the monsoons about the rains for a newspaper here, and that just happened to be the week that another one of those flood scares had happened, and Tamil Nadu government I think has begun to err on the side of caution now. And this is a very interesting scenario for everybody, because now people are mad at the government for telling them there could be a flood, but then there is no heavy rainfall. And this is a very, from where we were 10 years ago, it's now 10 years almost since the flood, from where we were, this is a very interesting space to be in, because we are talking about a people who were just literally abandoned by the state and thrown into the dark with the floods. And now you're talking about every household now knows what is, how many cusecs of water is being let out into a particular river from a reservoir. What does it mean if the government says they're going to let out more water now, or that there is a red alert or an orange alert? And these alerts were not taken seriously even 10 years ago. And so now they have taken very seriously. People are moved out of homes. And so last year in November, there was a very serious alert, and people expected for there to be a flood almost as much. Everybody feared that it would be like it was in 2015, but then nothing really happened, thankfully. We were all happy that nothing happened, but then you can now sense the anxiety of it, because it is now a living thing in people's memory. The water disaster of Chennai is now a living thing, and so it is a cultural aspect, it is a cultural memory of the city now. It is in the city, and the city and the administration are both in a conversation right now in which they are trying to avoid a repeat of this particular memory. And it's very interesting for me to watch this play out every monsoon, this dance of, oh, is it going to flood, is it going to not flood, oh no, it's not going to rain as bad as it did. But for me, the biggest takeaway from what has happened and what has changed is the reservoir management of this city, which was abysmal before 2015 and which was not a part of conversation, which didn't matter to people as much, is now very much a part of public consciousness. People ask questions about it. People know when, everybody knows that the city has a water problem as well, and so people are vigilant. And so I think that is the best way to deal with any crisis in a community, when the people themselves are in charge. And now the government is also wise to this, the fact that people are watching and that they will make demanding answers. And so in terms of the other end of what Bharat was also talking about in terms of rejuvenating the rivers or maintaining the rivers, I feel like it seems like work takes off, but you don't ever really, obviously it's an ongoing project, so you won't see the end of it. But just yesterday, my husband, who's a lawyer, was telling me that there's often a complaint that the companies that take over these projects of river maintenance, which involves basically removing debris, removing the invasive species of plants that take over the riverbeds, desilting and all of that. They're so invasive, these plants in rivers, that the companies themselves usually sort of leave a little bit of the debris just like that lying in a corner, so that in a year they can get their contracts back. So we are talking about corruption at that level. So because at the end of the day, who are these contracts going to? They're going to, relatives of politicians or, their friends, and so there is a lot of will, and there's also a lot of work happening, but there's also business as usual, corruption as usual. All that is also going on underneath. I feel, and we have accepted that as part of the Indian urban experience, and we just laugh about it, and we just say, yeah, of course. Because I was just noticing unusual growth of plants in one of the rivers the other day, and I was wondering, how come it's this bad? And that's when this conversation came up of how companies work, basically. And there is conversation happening around river water rejuvenation and waterfront leisure parks. Our current chief minister especially really likes spaces where you can walk in urban areas, which is a really good thing. He was responsible for one of those really good eco parks that used to be a mound of literal debris. He converted it into an eco park at the tip of the Adyar River. But the flip side is also obviously the conversation that makes everybody uncomfortable, which is the removal of the marginalized who live along the rivers and then resettling them on wetlands far away from the city. So one of the writers that I interviewed, a Tamil Dalit writer, Tamil Prabha, spoke about how Chennai was being removed of its original inhabitants, of its identity, of the people who are its culture, and it was being facilitated and made into a city for the rich. It seemed almost as if a cultural erasure was going on of Dalits from the margins being removed from the city, from their oldest neighborhoods like Chintadripet, which is where Tamil Prabha is also from, and they were being all resettled on these huge, vertical slums far away from the city. And that's also a conversation that is ongoing. I teach a writing class, and one of the students was from one of these neighborhoods, and he wrote about his experience of being in these spaces during the floods. And he said that in cities they say there's no wall and there's no separation between us versus them. But he says in these neighborhoods where people from the city's riverfronts have been relocated to, the poor and the marginalized have been relocated to, when you go to these neighborhoods, you see that invisible wall. You can literally see the drop in infrastructure and the quality of life coming down, and access, and it's almost as if they have been moved far away and then forgotten about in terms of amenities and things like that. So that is another aspect of riverfront beautification, especially because we have this obsession of making Chennai, Singara Chennai, like Singapore, for many years now, and so this is something that I wanted to highlight as well. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Krupa. That was quite interesting, especially the excerpts from your book, which highlights how the rivers flow into the city, the different reservoirs, and the floods of 2015, what it felt to the people. And also you highlight some of the ground realities in the city, the problems which everyday people face, how marginalized have been removed from riverbeds for better eco parks and other such recreational spaces for the rich, which is again an interesting area. But one thing which interests me a lot, I think, after Rhett's talk will move forward to, is the whole idea of how people in Chennai perceive the real problem, as in, is it the floods or the water scarcity? Because when I first came to Chennai, the identity which the locals gave me about the city was that it's a city always in water crisis, but again then I saw issues of floods coming in. So that makes it very interesting, and how the local government, the state and both the local government look into this whole two different sides of the city. So that is something to talk about. So to move forward, Rhett, could you take on from here?
Absolutely. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Great. Well, thanks so much to Abhishek for inviting me to participate. It's been a privilege, fascinating to hear from both Krupa and Bharat. I thought maybe the best thing that I could contribute to this conversation would be a bit of a comparative perspective from what's happening here in the southwestern United States and some of the similar challenges that we're dealing with, and then maybe think a little bit about possible solutions, some of which we've tried, some of which we haven't tried. I'm thinking I'll run through 7 issues that I think are shared between the Colorado River Basin and the kinds of challenges that are being faced in Chennai. To give you a sense, for those of you who aren't familiar, the Colorado River Basin, the Colorado River flows south from the Rocky Mountains in Wyoming and Colorado, south through Utah, New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, California, and then into Mexico. So it includes 2 countries, the United States and Mexico, 33 Native American tribes, 7 states, and it serves about 40 million people, including the cities of Los Angeles, San Diego, Phoenix, Las Vegas. So a major river, nothing on the scale of the Brahmaputra or the Ganges in terms of size and scope, but in a growing desert region, a very important river. And that river has been exceptionally controversial. It's been subject to a lot of legal disputes. We are in the middle of negotiating the future of the river. So in 2026, on December 31st, 2026, all of the laws that govern how we share the Colorado River across boundaries, political boundaries, will expire. So we are frantically negotiating a new world. If we don't find a solution to this, if we don't negotiate a new solution, it's difficult to imagine what the actual crisis will be. But I think at this point, we are careening towards major litigation, and that's disappointing and frustrating. I had been hopeful that we had perhaps been moving towards a more collaborative solution based on a consensus amongst the different jurisdictions. But as I'm talking right now, it looks like we're all heading towards litigation. Now, the challenges that the Colorado River Basin are facing are shared with the same kind of challenges you're facing with urban water governance in Chennai. The first, which I think is just beautifully illustrated by Krupa's work, is just variability, largely driven by climate change. So you're seeing more extreme drought and flood cycles within Chennai. We're seeing something somewhat comparable within the Colorado River Basin. Climate change is resulting in more frequent and more intense ENSO years. So ENSO is the El Nino Southern Oscillation phenomenon. It's a abnormal warming of the Pacific Ocean. And we're getting, as you can imagine, with the warmer climate, we're getting more frequent years where we have a warmer Pacific Ocean. And usually that means we get a wetter winter here in the Colorado River Basin, which you would think would be good for us because we would get more snowpack. And in fact, that has been the case. We're getting, in the last 20 years, we are tending to get 10 to 20% more than our normal winter snowpack. The problem is, and this is the problem that a lot of our models have not captured, is that even though we're getting more snow, we're getting less runoff. So our winters are wetter than they have been in the past, but our winters are also hotter. And the problem has been that we may get 110% of our normal snowpack, but we'll only get 30% of that will ever reach the river. And the reason being is that our air is so hot and our air is so dry and our soils are so dry that the water just never reaches the river. And so this is causing a major issue with water supply management. So we're not dealing necessarily with the same degree of flooding challenges, but we are dealing with wetter winters, but much more extreme drought conditions. And the last 25 years have been the most extreme drought conditions we've seen in 1,000 years within the Colorado River Basin. Now, the next issue that I think we share, and if you were to ask me what the best solution is on the side of the climate change issue, I would say that the best solution for both Chennai and for the Colorado River Basin is more accurate and more transparent data. And one of the things this is sort of maybe a silly example, but I was reading some work in behavioral economics, and they were talking about if you have a group of friends who are all sharing a plate of shrimp at a table, if the shrimp has a tail on it, everyone will share the shrimp equally, because people will be able to look around at each other's plates and see how many tails there are on the plate. Or if you were sharing chicken wings, drumsticks, you'd see the same thing. Everybody would have bones on their plate. You could tell what everybody was doing. But if you eat chicken without the bone or shrimp without the tail, someone at the table always cheats, because there's no data. There's no transparent data for people to see what they're doing. So for me, one of the most important things that we can do to facilitate better adaptation to climate change is finding more incentives for there to be accurate and transparent data sharing. And I've worked on water projects all over the world, and there are not, frankly, a lot of universals in water policy. Every river basin is so different that it's difficult to think that one problem or one solution translates easily into another river. But there are some universals that I've seen, and one universal that I've seen is rural people do not want to be told to meter their wells anywhere in any country ever. So we have to think about ways to facilitate incentives for people to install smart meters on their wells. One of the ways we might be able to consider doing that is to talk about how there can be tax breaks or subsidies to help facilitate installation of smart meters, so that at the very least we know where wells are and what their pumping capacity and daily pumping rates are. That information alone fed into a model would do an enormous amount of good. I've worked in Lebanon for the last 10 years or so, and we would have these programs where we would go to villages and say, if you will disclose the location of your illegal well, we will put treatment on the well for free. But we want to integrate the well into a smart system where you'll have a smart meter that'll tell us the location of the well and your pumping rates. And if you'll do that, we'll grandfather in the illegal well. We'll waive any civil penalties, and you'll get free water treatment on the well. And people still won't disclose the location of the well. And a lot of that has to do with trust in the government. People see the government as coming for their water, and they trust a more localized approach for the people who drilled the well, so they don't want to disclose the location of the pumping capacity of the well. And so I think a lot of that has to do with improving trust, improving credibility with government actors within a lot of these communities. Next thing I was thinking about similarities is the challenge of subnational interstate water disputes. There are a lot of ways in which India and the United States have a lot of water challenges in common, and one of them, I would say that India, in my experience at least, India, Australia, and the United States, one thing that those three countries share in common is that their subnational states have a significant amount of power and sovereignty connected to their water supply. So for a lot of other countries, even their subnational provinces, they don't really identify with their water supply as being sort of symbol of sovereignty. But in India, the United States, and Australia, that's not true. In India, the United States, their subnational governments very much see the water as theirs, their province, a symbol of their sovereignty. And that's certainly true in the Colorado River Basin. And in Chennai, the Telugu Canal bringing in water from the Krishna River is comparable to the Central Arizona Project Canal that brings water from the Colorado River on the border of Arizona and California into Arizona. And it's been a really controversial canal, one that's sparking and driving a lot of the litigation dispute right now in particular between Arizona and California, about the history and the future of that canal and whether it'll continue to be operated. That canal represents about 40% of the water supply flowing into Phoenix, which is the fifth biggest city in the United States of America. And so shutting off 40% of the water supply to the fifth biggest city in America is, a political non-starter, but California has a lot of the law on its side when it comes to whether or not the future of that canal will persist. And ways in which I think both India and the United States can find solutions is to do a better job of conceiving rivers not as lines but as circles. So if you think of a map, very often rivers are portrayed on a map like big jagged cracks in the land. They look like lines, and they look like lines that divide us. But a river isn't a line that divides us. A river is a circle that surrounds us. A river basin is a circle. If you think of the world like a golf ball, it's a big sphere covered in divots. Every divot is a drainage basin. It's a circle. So seeing ourselves as members of a single river basin community is a way to help move forward a conversation. And that's difficult when subnational jurisdictions identify so strongly with their river as a symbol of their own sovereignty and of their own culture. And so it's difficult for me to know how we transition to a world where, in the Colorado River Basin, we don't conceive of ourselves as Arizonans and Californians and Americans and Mexicans, but we conceive of ourselves as citizens of the Colorado River Basin. How we get to that point, I don't know, but part of it might have to be with strengthening interstate river basin commissions and recognizing, at least acknowledging more power within those interstate coordinating river basin commissions as an improved way of helping to avoid litigation and facilitate cooperation. So the other challenge I think that we're seeing in both the Colorado River Basin and with urban water management in Chennai is the proliferation of private wells that aren't showing up on any inventories, and the saline intrusion and dropping groundwater levels associated with increased groundwater pumping. This has been a major issue throughout the Colorado River Basin. It's a huge issue all over India, but in particular around Chennai. There's been a lot of struggles with improved groundwater management. In Arizona, what we've sort of done here has been a kind of complex trade. We reached a crisis point a couple decades ago on groundwater where farmers who were growing nuts sued the mining companies and sued the cities, saying that they were dropping the groundwater table and it was killing the nut groves. And the farmers won and threatened to won the litigation, and threatened to turn off the groundwater supplies to the miners and to the cities. And ultimately the deal that was struck was farmers and miners agreed that they would freeze their pumping rates. They wouldn't pump any more groundwater than they had on average pumped over the last 5 years. But in exchange, the cities agreed that they would no longer approve any more housing subdivisions unless they could demonstrate that those subdivisions had 100 years of assured water supply. So that was our grand bargain between farmers, miners, and cities. Farmers and miners decided we will freeze our groundwater pumping, and the cities agreed we won't grow unless we can prove that we've got enough water for the growth that we're planning. This has been a success, I think, in Arizona. Our problem is that, number one, we've tied a lot of our groundwater management to the availability of the Colorado River because we were using some of our Colorado River supply to recharge our aquifers. And now that there's such extreme drought in the Colorado River Basin, the availability of that water as a recharge source is now in question. And then we've recently, because we're seeing such severe drops in groundwater and we're seeing such severe shortage in the Colorado River Basin, we are now issued a moratorium on housing development that's based on groundwater. So in Phoenix and in and around Phoenix, Arizona, we no longer approve any housing developments where their water supply is only groundwater. So one possible solution is to require any new housing developments to prove a diverse water supply portfolio and prove available supplies for groundwater recharge to achieve safe yield. Now, another problem that I think we share between this region and Chennai is the work that Bharat is talking about, which is, water governance fragmentation. So just as in Chennai, where you'll have, the Chennai Metropolitan Development Authority handles land use, the Metropolitan Water Supply and Sewage Board will handle supply and sewage. The Chennai Rivers Restoration Trust will work on river rehabilitation and remediation. The Greater Chennai Corporation will work on stormwater management. The Tamil Nadu Public Works Department will own and operate water infrastructure and flood control protections. These are all interrelated and competing agency actions at various levels of the government. And the same problem exists here in the Colorado River Basin. The federal government, through the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and the Department of the Interior, owns and operates most of the large dams and reservoirs on the Colorado River Basin. The Central Arizona Water Conservation District manages the canal that brings water from the Colorado River into Phoenix. The Arizona Department of Water Resources, California State Water Control Boards, these are local state boards that manage their individual water regulation, and then individual metropolitan utilities, some of which are private, some of which are public, are the ones that are setting rates and doing the infrastructure development. And so we have the same challenges with, turf wars over regulation and competing jurisdictional issues, turf wars between agencies. And I think Bharat already talked about what I think is the same bias that I have, which is, a focus more on decentralization, localization of water management, and making sure that the cities are able to make their own sort of adaptive approach to diversifying their water supply portfolio, recharging the aquifers, seeking augmented supplies, etc. The next major issue I think that we share is with land use. I think Chennai, the connection between land use regulation and the water supply issues and the flooding issues as well, I think those are direct connections. So you've seen, development of an IT corridor on, former, lakes, or, development of IT corridors on tops of wetlands. So you're putting impermeable surfaces on the top of dry lake beds. You're putting impermeable surfaces on top of wetlands, which is aggravating groundwater issues because you're not getting the same percolation and groundwater recharge. It's also aggravating flooding issues because you're not getting the same flood protection that you would have gotten had you maintained, existing natural wetlands. We've done made a lot of the same mistakes in this region as well. Both regions also have had a hefty amount of agricultural to urban water shifts, as peri-urban agriculture has been phased out as urban sprawl has moved in. And that has challenges as well, again, with more impermeable surfaces moving in. And that has challenges for food security issues as you watch farms be pushed out in favor of growth. This has been the same kind of challenges we're dealing with. And especially in this region, you're seeing a lot of semiconductor and microchip manufacturers are moving in. So we just had a large Taiwanese company come into Arizona, TSMC, which is a major water consumer. So at a time when we're dealing with drought, you're watching this massive new industry moving in, consuming a lot of water. We have a lot of data centers moving in, and with AI and then the coming quantum computing revolution, you're going to see more and more energy demands for data centers moving in, and those energy demands are going to have related increased water demands. How do we begin to manage that problem? A lot of that, I actually think, maybe surprisingly, is less about water management and more about heat mitigation. And I think that means both heat mitigation at the micro level, meaning how do we find low and no water cooling technology for things like data centers and semiconductor producers, investing in low and no water cooling technologies, and how scalable are those cooling technologies for energy generation? Can we scale the same technologies that we're using for more water efficient cooling in data centers? Can we scale that up to help cool power plants? If we can do that, then we can get massive water savings. I think that might be where the future of a lot of our water savings are come from, as both Chennai and Phoenix move into a time when you're watching a lot more technology, data centers and semiconductor producers and technology manufacturers moving into these urban areas. Another issue that I think we're sharing in common is the conversation around water augmentation. Sai University has been an innovator and a leader in the area in the conversation about expanding desalination. We're having similar conversations in the Colorado River Basin about expanding desal capacity. There is a desalination plant in Carlsbad, California right now, the Poseidon plant, which is a relatively large capacity. But as happens in a lot of these transboundary situations, Arizonans and Mexicans and Nevadans see California building a big desalination plant, and we just think, well, it's just the rich getting richer. It's California building a big desalination plant, generating its own water without sacrificing any water to its neighbors, which is why Arizona is having a conversation with Mexico and partnering with Mexico about the possibility of a desalination plant in Mexico. Mexico and Arizona are much more closely aligned in terms of hydro diplomacy than Arizona and California are. So there's been a conversation. Mexico's been expanding its desalination capacity, especially in a lot of its tourist areas, its resort areas. So there's been a conversation about, how can Arizona help invest in expanding desalination capacity in Mexico, and then in exchange, Mexico giving Arizona a cut of its Colorado River water. Those are tough conversations, made tougher by the sort of shakeup in our hydro-diplomatic and general diplomatic relationship with Mexico with the advent of the Trump administration. So it's made the conversation more complex, especially with tariffs coming in. We're adding in layers of issues on an already complex challenge. But I do think desalination will be a part of our future. But importantly, to get desalinated water that's going to make sense to us economically. I mean, even the best desal systems are producing, they're producing a single cubic meter of fresh water from seawater at about 2.5 kilowatts per cubic meter, but they're still producing it at maybe, at relatively high cost. So we have to make sure there's a market for that high cost water if we're going to do it. And for now, it's been cheaper for big cities to invest in direct potable reuse, recycling wastewater for potable use, than it has been to look into desalination. So while I do think desal is a part of our future, wastewater recycling has so far been the way we've been moving towards more water augmentation. And then finally, I just wanted to talk about what Krupa had mentioned at the end, which I think is a major issue here as well, which is water equity. The tribes, Native American tribes in Arizona, have suffered a lot from water insecurity. Colonias, which are sort of unincorporated small communities along the border of the U.S.-Mexico border, they've also suffered from major water insecurity issues. Just in the last couple of years, there's a community that grew up just north of Phoenix called Rio Verde Foothills, and it was a community of these great big mansions, very wealthy people building big mansions. And with cuts to the Colorado River, Scottsdale, the city of Scottsdale, had been selling water to this big wealthy community. Scottsdale decided to stop selling them water, so this big wealthy community ran out of water. And there was massive panic all over Arizona about how can this happen? How can we let these big rich people with their big mansions run out of water? And one of the really frustrating things to me was that we have thousands and thousands of people in this river basin who suffer from extreme water insecurity all the time, but there was never the same level of outrage or urgency because they're poor. And so I think the water equity issue is one that is always important when we're thinking about it's a challenge that you're going to face and are facing in Chennai, and it's one that we continue to face here in Arizona and throughout the Colorado River Basin, and particularly acute for Native American tribes. So I'll leave that there. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Rhett. It's in fact quite interesting to look at this whole comparative perspective. Two places so far apart, yet so many commonalities. Especially, I'm quite intrigued by the whole subnational interstate water disputes, which has been a major bone of contention. Anywhere you speak to somebody in Chennai, they will talk about how people upstream in Karnataka have been misusing the waters of the Kaveri. And this animosity is there. I mean, you sense it as a third person from a different place. When I come here, I see that tension between people about this whole transboundary water dispute. And again, the whole idea of this proliferation of private wells. I mean, I see it in Chennai every day. So many unregulated tankers, and they are pumping out groundwater from farmlands right outside the city. I see it from a lot of these wells which were earlier used by farmers are now today supplying water. And this whole idea of water equity, I mean, big you have big apartment complexes in the city, which have like tanker after tanker coming in, water coming in, while impoverished suburbs of the city have just one tanker coming in, just one tanker of water coming in. So these whole differences that we see is definitely quite, yet similarities yet differences is quite interesting. But moving forward, can we take a few questions?
Sure.
Yeah, so there are a few questions coming in. I think there's somebody, Abil Hussain, who's asked, how is rapid urbanization and infrastructural development impacting Chennai's natural water systems and their ability to provide ecosystem services for climate resilience?
Krupa, you want to take that?
Yeah. So, like I said, not only are they sort of moving people out of rivers and putting them on wetlands, our entire IT corridor is on wetlands, especially the Palikarnai Marsh, which should have been a really big water sink during the 2015 floods as well. And so the interconnectedness, like Abhishek was talking about, of there not being enough water and there being flooding, is especially exacerbated in these areas, especially along the IT corridor, where in one of the huge IT complexes, for months after the floods, I think it was the DLF complex, for months after the floods, there was speculation about how many people actually really died, what actually happened in one of those IT parks, because there was so much water going through, flowing through that part of town. And then you had another hospital which was built literally, there's a chapter in my book about this, a hospital that was built on a riverbed, actually on a path, on a canal that is branching off of the riverbed, and building on, and my book focuses on this largely, building on top of water bodies using a legal loophole called, acquiring NOCs, which is a no objection certificate, which is the job of somebody from the Public Works Department. And so basically, a lot of these canals and a lot of what the Public Works Department does is actually, has been inheritance that the Britishers left for us, and they've left their corruption behind as well. The rot runs very deep, and it runs to this day, and all of the urban corruption that happens and all of the rot that we see in our cities can be traced back to, because the British didn't set up the Public Works Department to help us. They were here to, there's a Tamil word for it called surandal. They were here to literally plunder. And so the department is not here to serve, in my opinion, people as well as, as the name would suggest. And so this thing of getting an NOC and then a building on top of water bodies has been going on for decades in Chennai, and it continued to happen even after the flood. A humongous complex has come up on the river. They just built a 15 feet wall next to the river and built an apartment complex that is, where apartments selling for several crores in the heart of the city. And so this continues to happen to this day. And so I leave it up to the wisdom of, we'll have to leave it up to the wisdom of people at this point, because why are they doing, why do you spend crores? Because you are going to drown at some point. I mean, there's just no way that you're not going to drown, or the other side of, this, which Abhishek was talking about, which is all of us are dependent on groundwater in Chennai in most cases, right? We have bores in our buildings. We have the Chennai Corporation gives us water through using all of these other reservoirs, and then almost all buildings in Chennai have a bore wherein we are taking out water from the ground, as Professor Larson was just talking about his status. And so there is a significant amount of sinking that's happening because of the land is sort of sinking. I think it's called subsidence. Is that what it's called? Yeah, there is some amount of, and so our groundwater sort of every time we pump water from the ground, from the underground, and then the water is sort of finished, and then a new layer of water has to come. There's a little bit of a collapse, and so in fact, Chennai is not only experiencing rising coasts because of global warming, it's also sinking because of continued use of groundwater. And so building on top of these water bodies, on top of everything else, is just like a recipe for a perfect disaster. We haven't seen the worst of it yet, I think, in terms of the 2015 floods.
Thank you, Krupa. There's, I think, one final question. It's from Abil Hussain again. It's about water equity. Abil asks, how are social and spatial inequalities in water access and vulnerability being addressed in Chennai's urban transformation and water governance strategies, particularly for disadvantaged communities?
Is that for me as well? Yeah, I guess, right.
Bharat, would you also like to pitch in for it?
I'd like Krupa to actually address that, because she's in her work, she's often pointedly referred to caste as a big barrier, caste hierarchy. So
this is something that I wrote about as well. The year my book about the floods came out was also the year of almost day zero in Chennai, when we didn't basically have any water. And I was trying to sell my book, but then I was being asked everywhere to write about the drought instead. And so I wrote for another magazine in which I've spoken about this earlier as well. There is a Tamil expression called Korayadi Sunday, which is literally referred to like this brawl that happens in front of a water pump. When two people fight really very badly, we use this expression. It's part of our local language now, and so this is especially used in terms of like as if disparaging women who fight in front of the water tanks. And so just from the imagery you can understand the inequality in place, the unreal burden that is placed on the woman from the vulnerable community already. So women are in charge of water in the house, they go out and they're trying to get water, and they are having to fight for their water, right? So the culturally coded information here is basically just there for everybody to see that the biggest, the brunt of the water crisis is borne by the poor and the vulnerable, and especially the women and the young men of these communities who have to go and fetch water. And this idea that the electoral vote bank being the reason that some facilities reach certain pockets of marginalized. If you were within the city, you could still access some amount of water. You could still talk to your MLA or talk to your mayor or somebody like that, and have your needs addressed. Has also been removed by taking them out of the city and putting them somewhere really far away, out of sight, out of mind. Right? You just put them away somewhere, and they're all together in this really large space now, where they can't particularly negotiate with the local government as much. But within the city, you would see, especially in poor neighborhoods, you see these water tankers that are arranged by the government itself. There'll be one who's in charge of like a local slum lord who's in charge of all of the tenements there, who would arrange for a water tanker to sort of come and give water. And even then, there are entire families subsisting on 3-4 buckets of water an entire day, and they'll just have to do all of their work within this, and then they'll have to use a public toilet facility that has been built by the corporation for other ablutions and activities. So the changes to that are going to be hard to come because of caste, the burden of caste that comes with the people who live in these communities, and then the occupations that are involved in addressing the challenges of water and good toilets and decent facilities. And so that is a larger problem that's not going to go away in urban Chennai. It's going to be there for a while.
Can I say something to this? I mean, Krupa, I think, raised a very important point. But it also makes me wonder often, where water law stands in all of this, because there's been some treatment of water law by Indian economic historians, Tirthankar Roy being one. I used his book in one of my Sai classes, where he speaks about how the struggle in rural India for lower caste communities was actually access to the commons, where they were denied access to wells that were actually reserved or for upper caste villagers. But the movement to the cities, lower caste migrants in this case, to informal communities, has created hierarchies of a different kind, where you have access to water, but then there are disparities between people living in informal communities who tend to be predominantly lower caste, and upper caste communities living in more formal housing. So how does the law address all this? How does water law address all this is something I'm very interested in, and I've not seen very clear answers to that. One of the ways lower caste communities in the informal housing neighborhoods in Indian cities try to make a claim to water is by getting regularized as settlements, and then that makes them better situated in a legal sense for access to water. And this again is a very big question, I think, in the Indian urban context, but it has not been sufficiently addressed. I think because our urban scholarship is, if not quiet on the question of caste, it has not been very direct in addressing some of these, I think, questions, right? And I think it comes out very well in the work of Roy, who's an economic historian, and he talks about how Ambedkar, who drafted the Indian Constitution, started his social struggles in Maharashtra on the question of access to water, and the distinction between how that question was addressed in the urban and the rural context is, I think, it is a big academic question, but it's also, I think, a question that has a lot of practical relevance. And I think Krupa highlighted that very well by talking about the disparities between lower caste migrants to cities, often second generation, third generation, living in informal settlements in Chennai and Mumbai, and facing these disparities, but trying to exercise leverage because they can vote in elections and getting regularized. Yeah.
The upper caste communities sometimes object to water being given to in parts of Tamil Nadu. That still happens.
Yes, it's still a present question. You're right.
Yeah. As we reach the end of this panel discussion, I'm glad that the whole issue of caste and water equity came in, especially towards the end, and both Krupa and Bharat talking about it. I also think, as I've been noticing across, although where I come from in Northeast, issues of caste are not that grave, but coming to mainland Indian cities, I see how important it plays a role. And the whole question of who are the hardest hit when it comes to either flood or water crisis, and why these groups especially are hardest hit, right? So none of us, especially in the water governance sector, even in the urban water governance sector, even if you look at the government, if you talk to bureaucrats, nobody is discussing that. That's the biggest challenge which I see at the present times. But nevertheless, I hope things get better. With more discussions like these and caste bringing in the issue of caste at the heart of this whole access to water and who controls water, and some of these discussions would someday at least bring in water equity. But I thank you all, especially to the panelists, for this rich and insightful discussion. I'm glad, I mean, as I am moving out of I'm glad we could have had this event before that. And thank you to the panelists for being here, for participating in it. I hope you have had some meaningful takeaways from this discussion. And I hope all of us in the panel here, we could collaborate someday in future on some of these issues. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abhishek. Thank you, Rhett.